If silence feels uncomfortable to you, that's not an accident. If the idea of sitting alone with no phone, no music, no noise, no distraction feels almost unbearable, that should tell us something. Because discomfort with silence is not a personality trait. It's a cultural warning sign. We are raising a generation that has never experienced real silence. Not quiet background noise, not headphones turned down. I mean actual silence. The kind where there is nothing demanding your attention, nothing buzzing in your pocket, nothing filling every spare moment with stimulation. For many young people today, silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels threatening. And that should concern us because silence is where real wisdom used to be formed. We live in a culture that treats noise as normal and stillness as suspicious. Every moment is filled. Every pause is interrupted. Every thought is drowned out by content. And the result is not just distraction, it's shallowness. A country addicted to noise slowly loses its ability to think, reflect, pray, or lead. This isn't a partisan problem, it's a human one. Parents see it, teachers see it, coaches see it, grandparents feel it almost immediately. Something has changed in how young people process the world. Not because they're less capable, but because they've never allowed to sit with their own thoughts long enough to develop judgment. Wisdom does not come from volume, it comes from stillness. Jonathan Haidt has spent years documenting what many parents already sense intuitively. As social media use exploded in the early 2010s, rates of depression, anxiety, and self-harm among teenagers and young adults rose sharply right alongside it. Not gradually, not coincidentally. The curves almost moved together. Haidt's research shows the rise is especially pronounced among young generations who grew up with smartphones and social media as a constant presence. A generation that never unplugged, never learned how to self-regulate, never learned how to sit with boredom, never learned how to be alone without feeling lonely. That's not a moral failure. It's a developmental one. And here's where something even more troubling happens. When you lose the ability to think deeply, you start outsourcing your thinking to others. When you can't sit in silence long enough to reflect, you look for someone else to tell you what to think, how to feel, what to blame, and what matters. That is the noise. It's not just sound. It's borrowed opinions, prepackaged outrage, influencers, commentators, and online figures stepping in to do the thinking for you. Not because they're wise, but because they're loud. Not because they're grounded, but because they're constant. Silence used to be where people develop judgment. Now judgment is downloaded. For most of human history, silence wasn't optional. People walked, they worked with their hands, they waited, they sat with discomfort. They had long stretches of time where there was nothing to do but think, pray, or talk face to face. That's where perspective came in. That's where patience was learned. That's where people discovered who they were when no one was watching. Now, every empty space is filled instantly. Waiting in line means strolling. Sitting alone means earbuds. Feeling bored means opening an app. Feeling anxious means drowning it out rather than sitting with it. We taught an entire generation that the goal is to never be alone with their own thoughts. And Haidt's data shows the cost of that lesson. When young people are deprived of quiet, unstructured time, their mental health suffers. When they are constantly stimulated, their ability to reflect weakens. When silence disappears, so does the space where identity and resilience are formed. This is where our culture's obsession with alpha males becomes especially ironic. We hear endless talk about masculinity, about dominance, about strength, about being an alpha. But the definition of an alpha male is simple. It's the dominant male in a particular group. So here's the question no one wants to ask. How can someone ever claim to be dominant if they allow themselves to be dominated by every swipe of their thumb? If your mood is controlled by notifications, if your beliefs are shaped by algorithms, if your opinions are owned by strangers online, that's not dominance. That's submission. A man who cannot sit in silence is not in control of himself. And a man who is not in control of himself will always be controlled by someone else. Noise creates the illusion of strength while quietly eroding it. When you never experience silence, you never learn discernment. You don't learn how to weigh ideas. You don't learn how to reflect before reacting. You don't learn how to listen. Everything becomes impulse-driven. Emotion replaces judgment. Volume replaces truth. That's why our culture feels so reactive. Why outrage travels faster than understanding. Why people confuse being loud with being right. Silence is where humility is learned. Because in silence, you realize how little you actually know. Silence forces you to confront yourself, your fears, your inconsistencies, your responsibilities. Noise lets you avoid all of that. This matters deeply for faith, even if you're not particularly religious. Every serious spiritual tradition understands the importance of stillness. Prayer, meditation, reflection, confession, none of these happen in noise. They require quiet. They require slowing down. They require space. When you remove silence from a culture, you don't just weaken it spiritually, you weaken its moral clarity. You create people who react instead of reflect. You consume instead of contemplate. You repeat instead of reason. And eventually you create leaders who have never learned how to be still enough to lead wisely. Think about the leaders we admire most in history, not because they were perfect, but because they were grounded. They weren't frantic. They weren't constantly reacting to the moment. They had an internal compass. That compass was formed long before the spotlight found them. That kind of formation doesn't happen in a feed. It happens in quiet mornings, long walks, hard conversations, prayerful reflection, uncomfortable pauses. But we're raising young people in a world where silence is treated like a bug instead of a feature, where boredom is framed as a problem to be solved rather than a doorway to creativity and growth. We should not be surprised that anxiety is skyrocketing. Haidt's work makes clear that a generation deprived of silence and saturated with social comparison will struggle to find peace. When you never slow down, your nervous system never resets. When you're constantly stimulated, your mind never rests. When every thought is interrupted, nothing ever matures. Wisdom takes time, and time requires stillness. This is especially true for parents. We have to be honest about the example we are setting. If children never see adults sit quietly, reflect, read, pray, or simply be present, they won't value those things. If every moment in the home is filled with background noise, television, or scrolling, silence will feel foreign. But silence is not emptiness. Silence is preparation. It's where you learn how to listen to others, how to listen to God, how to listen to your conscience, how to tell the difference between a good idea and a tempting one. A society that cannot sit in silence will struggle to produce people who can lead under pressure, because leadership requires restraint. It requires patience. It requires the ability to pause before speaking or acting. We are training the opposite. We are training instant reaction, constant opinion, endless commentary. And then we wonder why so many people feel unanchored. This is not a call to unplug forever or reject technology. It's a call to recover balance, to intentionally reintroduce silence into our lives and our homes, to teach young people that not every moment needs to be filled, documented, or shared. Some of the most important moments in life happen quietly. Decisions about faith, about marriage, about vocation, about integrity. Those are not made in comment sections. They are made in reflection. If we want a generation capable of wisdom, we have to give them space to develop it. Because a nation that cannot be silent will eventually lose the ability to hear truth. And a generation that never experiences silence will struggle to know who they are when the noise fades. Wisdom is not loud. It never has been. But it only grows where silence is allowed to exist.
Hey, we the people like Gates Garcia, so that's no excuse.